My name is Sonia Mann, and I've been working roughly in the crypto world for, I don't know, maybe like 5-ish years. But that's not where I started. I started out as a freelance writer, just doing like random gigs off of Craigslist. That's where I found most of the first things that I put on my resume when I started creating a resume. Um, and they were mostly shitty little jobs, as you might expect, but I was able to sort of start leapfrogging from there and started writing about startups and the technology industry more broadly. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I still live, and I just kind of like stumbled into tech, or I guess tech adjacency, just out of sheer luck, and I guess some degree like curiosity. And I kind of mesh well with tech people in terms of personality, which is not surprising. My dad worked for IBM for decades and decades, so he's kind of a techie guy. Um, Anyway, I ended up working in journalism. I was never at any of the like top tier publications. The highest profile place that I worked was Inc.com, which is a small business magazine with a website. The website it's kind of like a artisanal slop, hand produced slop. A lot of like 10 habits of billionaires kind of thing. I don't even know what the current state of the Inc.com website is, but I would guess that it's kind of depressing. I found that to be like such a grind. And there's structural issues with journalism, both like cultural and economic, which I won't dive into too much here, but I found the industry really frustrating and kind of burned out on it. So I was looking for a new job, and I happened to know Josh Cincinnati, who I forget what he's currently doing, but at the time he had just come on as the executive director of the Zcash Foundation, and he was looking for like a communications person. He knew that I could write, and we had been Twitter buddies for a while, so he knew that like he had a sense of my sensibility and like how I think about things, which
Right.
is part of what's so awesome about making online friends, is that you kind of gradually get to know each other's mindset. And we also, he's really funny, and so we have kind of a shared sense of humor too. Anyway, he asked me if I was interested, or maybe I reached out to him. I don't remember which way it was. I think he found me because I had, tweeted, "Hey, I'm looking for a job," which has always been, that's how I've gotten all my best jobs, is by just being like, "Hey, I need a job, please." And so I worked at the Zcash Foundation for 2 years, I think. And then I got burned out on that too, because Zcash at the time was in this big governance struggle about the block reward. Part of the mining rewards for Zcash go to support initially the company that employed most of the founders who launched the coin. And this is another thing I'll try not to get too deep into, but basically there was a lot of acrimonious arguing over who should get the funds. Should the company still get the funds? Should, the foundation decide who gets the funds? Should the community vote on it? Should there be a DAO, et cetera, et cetera. And it's kind of funny looking back on that, like how controversial it was that Zcash had like a team allocation effectively, because Zcash was forked from Bitcoin, added in zero knowledge encryption to have a very secure private mode. But the Bitcoin culture is, very anti-dev rewards. So then there's like a rivalry with Monero, which is also much more of a like fair launch kind of start, but has a different security model with respect to the privacy. So there was just a lot of like conflict in the Zcash world, and I once again got kind of burned out. Like, I still think the people who I worked with in the Zcash world, both at the Zcash Foundation and at the Electric Coin Company and in the broader Zcash like holder ecosystem, like some really incredible people, especially some really incredible cryptographers who are so smart and so like wise, but I just couldn't take it. Like I got burned out on all this like governance kerfuffle. And I took a break for a year to just like work on personal projects. And then after that, I ended up at a startup, which was called Hedgehog. And you know what's funny, actually, is that Jacek and I both worked at this startup, like Jacek as in Jacek of Degen.
Yeah, I was gonna say Hedgehog was familiar. I remember that.
Yeah, and that's just like such a random little coincidence. And I remember him actually talking about Farcaster and trying to convince us to invest in the Farcaster ecosystem. And at the time, we were like, "What is that? Oh no, it's this tiny little thing," and didn't, end up following up on it, which kind of regret. I think it would have been good for us. But anyway, that startup was attempting to do compliant index-like investing, like automated index-like investing um, of cryptocurrencies, and was able to register with the SEC, which was kind of miraculous and took a lot of legal work. But it didn't end up working out, unfortunately. And I think it was one of those things where it's too early, like, and
Right.
also potentially um, it may end up being a DeFi thing instead of like a custodied exchange type thing, which is what we were doing. Anyway, I think it was a good idea. I still think it's a good idea, but we didn't like quite get it right, and the company ended up running out of money. And now Colton, who was the CEO of Hedgehog, now works with Jacek on the Degen project. So that's kind of funny how things worked out there. Um, and so after Hedgehog was winding down, I once again needed a job, and I was like, "Hey, I need a job. Can someone please employ me?" Um, and Will, who is the CEO of Splits, saw that in a similar story to how I joined the Zcash Foundation. Will and I have been buddies online for years and years. I don't even remember how or why we met. I think maybe it was from the Ribbon Farm ecosystem, Venkatesh Rao's old blog.
Mm.
Um, Venkat is also around on Farcaster, although I think he's not as active as he used to be since he's not super, like, I think he's only mildly interested in crypto, but he does do the Summer of Protocols project with the Ethereum Foundation. But anyway, I haven't caught up with Venkat in a long time, so I probably shouldn't speak authoritatively about what's going on with him. I guess that's just the vibe that I get from his casts. Anyway, that's how I ended up on Farcaster, because Will and Abram at Splits were kind of all in on Farcaster and suggested that I join and start getting to know the community. And so I actually invested the time in, getting set up and finding people and following people and exploring channels and trying to, figure out what was going on. And I got hooked. Like, I definitely at this point enjoy Farcaster a lot more than Twitter, which is really saying something because I was super addicted to Twitter for a long time. But the X era of Twitter is just not hitting the same, I guess. And maybe some of that is like where I'm at in my own life versus changes to the platform, but some of it is also the changes to the platform. Um, and I guess so. I went through all that spiel about my work history. I don't know that I really explained what I actually do, which is I work in what is kind of nebulously called communications. I guess you could call it content marketing, but I find I like both the word content, like there's no getting away from it, but I don't love it. And
Right.
also, content marketing just sounds like very soulless and kind of like shill-ish. Um, but really, the way I prefer to think about it is that I'm spreading the message of the organization. So both promulgating Split's values and also, letting people know about the product. But we're not super like salesy. I mean, we do like post demo videos and talk about the product and new features that are shipped, but we're also kind of talking about the Splits ethos and trying to like be part of the community of builders and creatives on Farcaster and participate in the culture, which is why we've been doing the This Week in Farcaster newsletter, which rounds up a bunch of things that people have shipped over the course of the past week, and why we've been doing an interview series with various builders who are making interesting projects that goes along with that project. Whew, okay. Do you have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, no, I've got a bunch. So first of all, thanks for sharing the story. It's an interesting and winding road, and I had like at least a few things that stood out that I wanted to dig in on. And now, like after like the second or third one, I'm now confused as to which one I should start with. But I want to go back to maybe the Zcash era, because Zcash has always been really interesting to me. And I always thought that, like, I got into crypto in, I don't know, like 2016, 2017. But unfortunately, like, I would have liked to have gotten into it more at that point, but I was just sort of passively aware. And at that point, I didn't really understand. I didn't really get any. I didn't get crypto. I didn't get Bitcoin. I was just, very high level, like, okay, internet money, which has gone up a lot in its first, 6 or 7 years. Good chance it might continue. And like put in, like, I don't know, a few $100 or something like that, and kind of rode it all the way down, all the way up in 2017, and then all the way down, and probably ended up, somewhere like net, even or whatever after buying it all the way up or whatever. And it was just, like I said, it wasn't a lot of money. I was very early in my career, and just sort of starting to get familiar with crypto a little bit. But then it was really in 2019, I would say, that I really dug in and became like really high conviction on Bitcoin, basically, and really felt like things sort of like, clicked for me, and I really understood it. And so, and ever since then, like I've obviously gotten more into crypto and other projects. But even since like way back then, like the second thing that was interesting to me after Bitcoin, like wasn't even, it wasn't Ethereum, it was Zcash. It was Bitcoin but private, basically. It just made like so much sense to me. And I'm sort of confused. I still don't have a great answer as to why we haven't seen, whether it didn't have to necessarily be Zcash. It could have been, like you said, Monero or something else. But why these privacy coins haven't had that moment yet and sort of become, like from my perspective, there should at least be one of them in like the top, I don't know, 10 or 12 market cap coins, and it's just kind of nowhere to be seen. And like, yeah, I think Monero is like maybe in like top 30 or something, but compared to, the top few, it's just nothing. And I wonder if from your time, inside of Zcash, do you have a perspective on, maybe some answer to that question, or at least thoughts on it? And also maybe with Zcash in particular, what might have held it back from like there's an argument to be made, I think, that a private version of Bitcoin is better than Bitcoin, just like flat out. And it's maybe harder to make now, with the difference in value being what it is, and sort of adoption being what it is, and everything like that. But yeah, just generally kind of curious your thoughts there.
So I have a couple. So there were like product issues with Zcash where shielded transactions, which are the private transactions, were this whole like separate mode and were not very scalable for a long time. The cryptography had to be improved so that it would be much faster. And so that like really held back just the ability to actually use Zcash, the private part of Zcash, for a long time. But more importantly, actually, I think is just that people don't care that much about privacy. Like the fundamental thesis of like people will care about privacy enough to use something other than the default is just wrong.
Right.
I'll say the people who make cryptocurrencies, or the people who like work on developing cryptocurrency infrastructure, often do care about privacy. And I think that is the vector by which these technologies may become more private, is like the people who work on Ethereum caring about integrating zero knowledge technology, that kind of thing. But
Right.
Your average user just like could not care less. So I think that's the main problem. And this is true of like internet privacy in general.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's generally sort of my sense as well. The thing that I've sort of been waiting for, though, is that I feel like the way there's sort of like a misconception maybe around Bitcoin and crypto more broadly, that like that there is some sense of privacy to it, because I think in the earlier days it was used like a lot for dark web, like buying drugs and stuff, Silk Road and whatnot. But like really, it's kind of it's more public than in a lot of ways than the money that we're using today. And like obviously, cash is pretty private by default. But even when you're transacting with credit cards with banks and whatnot, they have all the data, but it's not public. And like they can do stuff with it, and potentially they could like sell it, and the government could demand it, and things like that. But the blockchain is just like default public. Like anyone who cares can just go and like dig in. And so the thing that I've sort of been waiting for is, even today you see some of these apps that are starting to bubble up. Like, I don't know if have you heard of Interface?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So like Interface is like one of these apps that, I think it's really cool. It's basically, you can follow people and see, what they're doing on chain, and you can copy their trades and whatever you want. But as, crypto gets more and more prominent, and the apps and infrastructure, like, get more and more built out, it just seems that this public nature of blockchains is going to be more and more sort of utilized, and these people's financial activity is just going to become so accessible, so much more so than someone trying to figure out what I'm doing with my Visa credit card besides Visa, or potentially the government or something. And so what I'm sort of expecting is, like, I agree with you that people, privacy is more of a express preference, not so much revealed. But I'm sort of wondering if crypto in its full sort of potential, and with how with how default public it is, will finally like sort of push people over a tipping point where they're like, okay, this is actually too much data that I'm just like having people freely able to get, and so I want to rein it in with more privacy around my transacting. And maybe holding Bitcoin is fine, holding some cryptocurrency is fine, but like for the thing that you're using for everyday transactions, even in the digital world, but especially if you're going to be using crypto in like physical world stuff, I feel like it starts to get pretty concerning to have it all just so easily, public and available for not only people to like, go and analyze themselves, but for apps to be able to make it like incredibly easy to just stalk someone through their financial activities, basically.
Yeah, I agree that like as crypto is more used for actual purposes versus just like speculation, that it becomes more important. Like in particular location, say you're like, you have an abusive partner that you've escaped from or something, then if your location can be indicated really easily on the blockchain, that's kind of a problem. But that is like not the case for the vast majority of usage today. Like the way that you use crypto, like examining someone's wallet will not necessarily give you any indication of their location, especially not like in the moment. I think that like ideally that changes with adoption and with more like crypto infrastructure. But we're not there yet. I think also like high net worth individuals care more about privacy for kind of obvious reasons. It makes them a target. And for them in particular, like the location issue becomes a security issue as well, along with, like activists. I don't know. I don't want to be like too optimistic though, because my optimism has always been like dashed on the ground when it comes to privacy. I would like to see it happen. And I think you're the general thrust of your point there, that like as it becomes more of a real world thing versus just a like internet alternative reality thing, then privacy becomes more important on a practical level. And there are current subpopulations of crypto users who do actually really care about privacy. They're just really small relative to the overall group. And that's like a mix of like cypherpunks and like people who buy drugs. And for them, like Monero is kind of serving their purpose. Like Monero has product market fit amongst like darknet markets. Which, good for Monero.
No, I don't know. I've always liked what I've like heard and read from Zuko. And so that sort of like pulled me towards the Zcash that sort of side of things. I'm admittedly a bit ignorant on Monero for someone who generally likes the idea of privacy coins, but I always sort of got the sense that it was sort of as you've described it. The other thing I think, just switching gears a little bit is, it sounds like it's interesting, like your entire career basically has been built digital first, which I think people, it's obviously common and becoming even more so now, but to have started like sort of finding contract work on Craigslist, building sort of reputation and network on Twitter for years, leading to at least a couple of jobs, sounds like. I'm curious just like what you've sort of, what that experience of building a career digital first has been like, and what it's like seeing like maybe more people doing that now. Like I imagine when you started that, you might have had like maybe I'm wrong, but you might have had like sort of a more difficult time explaining to friends that like you were finding your jobs like gig work through Craigslist, and that was probably more unusual then than now. It's, not unusual at all.
I guess I've also always, most of my friend group has come from people I met online in one way or another. So that's like also a privilege of living in the Bay Area, is that there are a lot of quote unquote very online people who live here. So you can meet people online and then hang out with them in person.
Right.
And for me, that was like the rationalist community with some asterisks, like not maybe kind of the less wrong wing. Although I have read a fair bit of less wrong in my day, but I was really into Slate Star Codex for a while. And then I wandered into the quote unquote post-rationalist scene, which is like a really terrible label, but what can you do? And made a lot of friends.
How'd you get into this stuff in the first place, like Slate Star Codex?
Slate Star Codex, I like encountered it in two ways in relatively short period of time, and then that like got me obsessed, and I kind of did a deep dive. And one was that I was Googling, like I don't even remember what I was Googling. I was Googling something or other, and I came upon his anti-libertarian FAQ, I think, or maybe it was the anti-reactionary one. I like stumbled on one of his posts that was like politics adjacent and thought it was really insightful. And then I was dating my now husband, and his roommate was a big fan of Slate Star Codex, and it came up in conversation. I was like, oh, I ran into that blog the other day. I guess I should check it out more. And that kind of sent me down the rabbit hole. So it was very serendipitous.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt. You were saying, so like, being into that and some of these other things.
So yeah, I guess like reflections on digital first career, digital first networking. I mean, for me, like I did and still do just like a lot of grinding. Like I'm chronically online. I reply to people all the time. I post a lot of shit, most of which is like gets no traction because that's the nature of just posting a lot of shit. And I really enjoy, reading other people's thoughts like that. As soon as I found internet communities, I was completely hooked. And for me, the first context in which I was able to participate in internet communities was Neopets. And Neopets, like, it's this whole virtual pet game, but they also had community forums as part of the website. And I was just fascinated. Like, you can talk to all these strangers. You don't even have to talk to them. You can just read all the stuff that they're saying. And I just like dove headfirst into that and have not really come up for air since. I mean, like voyeurism is a substantial part of the draw. Like you just get to kind of spy on people by reading what they're saying, what they're talking about with each other. And I just find it fascinating. Like human nature is fascinating, seeing the ways that the patterns that internet communities take on. Like for a while, I was really interested in subculture schisms and how, you would get these niche cultures that would have these like little internecine conflicts, and then they would splinter based on that. And you would get new like child subcultures spawned. Sometimes, one of the splinters is not viable enough and it dies off. And sometimes it ends up like mutating into its whole own individual thing. So I just find that whole process really fascinating. And that kind of lends itself to working in like community marketing, I guess is maybe a better term than content marketing, because, you know, it's not just about like writing blog posts or whatever. It's about connecting with people and using content as a way to connect with people, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like whatever you want to call it, I totally sort of sympathize with your or empathize with your sort of description around the word content not being your favorite. I sort of, whenever I hear like content creator, it's just, I don't like it. Like I just like sort of like writing and podcasting and sharing thoughts on the internet. It's not really as much about, I don't know. There's the word content is like so loaded. I feel like it's like everything between, you know, a long form blog writer and Mr. Beast. But it makes sense that you sort of landed in that specialty, just given that you've been doing it personally for so long and get to know these people. And then, like you said earlier, these people get to bring you aboard on the team with like knowing, you know, I know what Sonya's like. I've been following her for so long, like understand her, what she cares about, how she communicates and all these things. And it's sort of just like easy to envision you like sort of picking up the role. So now it's with Splits. I actually don't know as much as I should about Splits. Like I've, you know, come across it a few times, definitely like been to the website. But maybe you could just give sort of the 101. The most recent time I sort of came to it was, you know, I know with like the recent, what was it, the Bybit hack that like Safe was having some trouble, which I guess is, you know, I don't fully know what's going on at Splits, but I understand it's like somewhat competitive or like sort of an alternative. So someone told me I should go try Splits instead of Safe. But yeah, I would be curious to hear from your perspective, you know, what was exciting about joining the team over there and how things are going.
So Splits makes tools for managing shared money. And where this originated was just a simple splitter where, say, you're collaborating with someone on an NFT or some other kind of project, and you're going to have on-chain revenue, but you want to allocate that revenue to each of you, either like 50-50 or in some specified proportion. What the Splits smart contract does is gives you a single address. You can have all your payments flow to that address, and it'll be automatically split to whichever ultimate destination addresses you want according to whatever percentage you decide. So that was kind of the first thing that Splits shipped. And that basic idea of like you have on-chain revenue and you want to manage it, you want to decide where it goes, you want to decide what amount goes where. Like every subsequent tool that Splits has created has been in that same vein. And the current one that we're working on is called Teams, and it's basically a wallet matrix, I guess you could call it, or an accounts dashboard, where you have multi-sigs and you can set up different multi-sigs that are sort of sub-accounts of your main account that have different permutations of signers. So you can say, like, for example, something what we have on our own team is there's like an operating wallet that the engineers use for, you know, various different things, for testing things. There's also a marketing wallet that is, I think it's just me and Will and Abe and Matthew who are the kind of like, they are more on the like go-to-market side, and then I'm the like community, etc. But you can have like different sub-wallets that are meant for different team members or meant for different purposes. It's also useful for like accounting. And because it uses passkeys, it's a combination of quite secure and also quite easy, which is something that is really rare in crypto. So I guess that's my like basic description. It's like having a bank account for your Ethereum wallets, and actually not just Ethereum, but like EVM in general. So that's another thing that the Splits dashboard just makes easy, is dealing with juggling funds across multiple chains. So like bridging and swapping and all of that is kind of abstracted into the background, so you don't have to think about it. And you don't have to like constantly be toggling between networks. You can just see everything in one place and use everything in one place.
with the passkeys, like you mentioned, sort of enabling this, high security, but also making things super easy. I know, with passkeys, for me, like the first passkeys wallet that I was using was with Coinbase Smart Wallet, like I guess last summer or something like that when it first came out, and that was like the first wallet that I felt like I could get like my parents to use, because you could, it's just so easy to set up on like an iPhone, and you don't have to like give them the whole spiel about their keys and all this complicated stuff. But I worry like that there's like some trade-off where people haven't been using these wallets for too long, but like just because it's easy to set up doesn't necessarily mean it's not easy to lose. And I wonder like about the trade-off of that with passkeys, like easy setup, highly secure, but do you have concerns of like any trade-offs with passkeys, or so far it's been pretty good?
Well, so it's a little bit more nuanced than what I initially said. There is you have kind of the backup of an externally owned account, which could be, say, a Ledger or whatever you prefer. That is kind of your your recovery account is the way to think of it. And then
that's optional?
No, that's required. You have to
okay.
have that as part of setting up your splits team.
Okay.
So you're not solely relying on passkeys. Passkeys are for the day-to-day usage because they're just vastly more convenient, but it's not your only way of accessing these funds.
Oh, that makes sense. That actually makes a lot of sense.
And there's a trade-off too, which is that you still have to custody your own keys ultimately in some sense, which is admittedly a huge pain in the ass. And that is something that I guess we would theoretically like to solve, but it's a very hard problem.
Well, you guys are also solving for, I'm assuming most of your guys' customers are, crypto natives, that you're not like, you don't have to really worry about serving an audience of people that doesn't know how to set up, a self-custody wallet.
And it's largely businesses. Like there are some individuals who are using teams, but it's mostly, as the name indicates, it's mostly if you are multiple people all like working with a shared pool of funds. That's where teams really shines, is in a collaborative context.
And so is it mostly people who are, might otherwise use Safe, or are there other types of people that are using splits for, coming from other products basically?
I would say it's mostly people who would otherwise use Safe, although sometimes, like, at least conceptually, sometimes they're actually using some other thing, not literally Safe, but
right.
Kind of a similar use case in terms of like this is your vault, your vault of funds
for the team.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Is it a big? I don't know. I sort of thought it was like a smaller team over there, but it sounds like there's at least a few of you at Splits?
Yeah. How many do we actually have? I want to say like 15. So somewhere in between 10 and 15.
Nice. And it's been active for some number of years, I take it?
Yeah, I think we just hit the 3-year anniversary recently.
Oh, nice. And you've been there for?
I've been here for about a year.
A year of that. Okay. Yeah, it seems like I always stumble into people who are at Splits on Farcaster. I don't know if the whole team's on there, but like I feel like a lot of the organizations I run into on Farcaster, there might be like sort of one representative there, or it's sort of like a one-man show or two-man show or something like that. But Splits seems like one of the, more like just based on what you just told me, like 10 or 15, I feel like I've run into at least, a handful of people on Farcaster that it's like a kind of a large team that seems to be investing time and energy in Farcaster.
Well, definitely the builder community on Farcaster is a big draw. Like both Abram and Will, the co-founders, both like definitely fall into that category themselves, like not just in a literal sense of like working on a startup, but also kind of philosophically, like they're tinkerers. They are interested in how things work. They want to, keep up with the newest technologies, especially in this area of passion of the EVM ecosystem. And so I think it just kind of has come naturally to them, or the appeal has been natural of being part of this Farcaster world. And then as like an extension of that, we realized a lot of potential customers for Teams are on Farcaster, and kind of our ideal users are here. So it makes sense to invest time and energy in being part of the community. It's also fun.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think, one of the things I've sort of joked about with Farcaster is it's there's like so many builders that it's like you can't just have a network of tons of builders like and no consumers, basically, because like the builders themselves aren't enough to like consume from all of the builders. So there needs to be like sort of a second. I mean, there is obviously like sort of another layer of people on Farcaster who aren't building as much and are just sort of interested in doing things in crypto, but the builder ratio feels like so high compared to something like crypto Twitter, where like the vast majority of people on crypto Twitter are doing things more like, I don't know, trading meme coins or collecting NFTs or whatever, like sort of being consumers more so than builders. And I wonder if that ratio is going to change over time with Farcaster, but it's like part of what makes it great as well. So
if Farcaster wants to survive, though, it definitely needs, and I know that like Merkle team knows this and is working on it, but it definitely needs more like quote unquote normal people. Maybe not normal in the sense, like I think it's probably going to be a while before an appreciable number of not crypto ecosystem at all people are on Farcaster, but definitely like people who are more on the consumer end of the spectrum. And like you said, there are some, but the ratios are off, which in some ways it's like a good place to start, because it attracts a lot of interesting talent who create cool experiments, like things like Degen or things like Clanker come out of the Farcaster's builder community. But then you definitely need people to actually use those things for them to be viable and for the network to be viable long term.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of the most successful projects on Farcaster thus far have like seeded on Farcaster and done well, but then sort of necessarily expanded outside of it for now to capture audience that's not available on Farcaster, with basically expanding into crypto Twitter. Like I remember there was this dashboard that came out a couple weeks ago or something that was like, it had all the top basically like Farcaster coins, if you will, and there was a column that you could like sort of sort by, or I actually like pulled the data and basically did it myself to see what percentage of these tokens like Degen and Hire and Moxie and whatever else, what percentage of them were actually held by Farcaster wallets. And for some of the smaller ones that are you sort of like know from Farcaster, the percentage was somewhat high. But for anything that had sort of like gained significant traction, the Degens, the Moxie, the Clanker, the Banker, all these like the percentage of the market cap that was held in Farcaster connected wallets was like sub 20%, or maybe around 20% at the higher end. Sort of like I feel like it was like 10 to 20% for those ones that I just named. And then I was sort of interested to see what I sort of thought in my gut, or felt in my gut, that Hire was the highest of of the various coins in that specific statistic. I think it was like at least 25% of it was held by Farcaster connected wallets, and that made sense to me because I felt like for the last several months that I've been into Hire that it sort of remains the most Farcaster aligned token. Not that others aren't, like of course, like all the Degen, Clanker, Banker, like all of these were also born, Moxie, whatever else. Like I'm not naming them, and hopefully people won't get too mad if I'm not shilling their bags. But a lot of these were born on Farcaster, of course, but they sort of like crossed the chasm to this broader world of crypto Twitter and whatever else. And once you cross it, you don't really like come back. And I feel like Hire, like obviously it's crossed it some amount, but I feel like how strong it is on Farcast. Like it's so, I feel like it's such a strong community on Farcaster, and yet has really yet to meaningfully break out. And maybe that's for the best for like sort of the continued quality growth of that community. But also it could be interesting to see, what happens if and when it does kind of expand beyond. I know you've been really into Hire for a while. I don't know if that's one of your sort of like favorite channels and communities on Farcaster, if there's others worth naming.
Yeah, I think Hire is definitely my favorite. I also really like the Diptychs. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Diptychs channel, where you pair two artworks or two images. I like that one a lot too. But
What's the
Hire is
story
definitely.
with Diptychs? Like, how did that? Do you know how that came about, or like what that is a reference to? I've seen you actually do these formats of posts. I think with base colors, or just generally, I've seen you do these, but I'm not familiar with that channel otherwise.
I think just like one guy started the channel. That's
Is
kind
that
of
like
the
a
my
is
knowledge.
that is that like a known term though, or something?
Oh yeah, it's an art term for juxtaposing. Yeah, there we go.
Okay,
Juxtaposing two different works,
okay,
which
okay.
kind of relate to each other in some way or like are in conversation with each other. And
Interesting.
I think that's especially, it's like a fun thing to do with the NFTs that you collect, because sometimes it feels like, you collect the pretty picture and then it just like sits there, right? Like what's the next step? And so I
Right,
like that making a diptych out of two pieces that you've collected recently is like it's both a way to like support the artist further by sharing their work, but it's also a way to like add your own curatorial taste more and to like express that. So I find that
right.
enjoyable. But Hire is
Yeah,
definitely my favorite. And I think what you were saying, like, it kind of makes sense to me because I feel like what's really magical about Hire is not just the aesthetic artifacts that come out of it, which are, like, don't get me wrong, some of them are really top tier. But what I think makes Hire so interesting and so sticky, at least for me, is the process of those artifacts being created. The like emergent collaborative process of someone having an idea and then all these other like extremely talented designers running with that idea, tweaking it, enlarging it, like doing a bunch of different versions of it. And that like happens on Farcaster. So if you're not on Farcaster, it's harder for you to participate in that or even to just see it happening. Like I, make various Hire things, but mostly I'm like watching. It's like a spectator sport as well. And it's really interesting to see these people who are so good at expressing ideas visually and like creating, creating beautiful designs. It's so cool to see them collaborating with each other and remixing. And if you're not on Farcaster, you might see the end artifacts, like when they get posted on the Hire Twitter account, but you don't see that process, which is what's so interesting to me anyway.
yeah. I think it's a really good point. And also, a lot of the like what you'll see on Twitter might be from one or two of like the more prominent people from the Hire community, or else
Mm-hmm.
maybe from the Hire like Twitter account itself. And there's just not as many sort of like players in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Where on Farcaster you get to see what's I know it's like not that many people, but I'm always sort of seeing someone new doing exactly what you're saying. Like the recent one has been one of my personal favorites so far, which is like these animals with like the retro look and the Hire like hat or vest and
They're
whatever it
kind
is.
of
I think
collar animals, which is fun. They're sort of like, gas station cashier, construction worker kind of vibe, which is,
yeah,
refreshing.
it's just a really great like aesthetic and vibe for whatever reason. And I'm pretty sure Blank Space was the one who started with them, and I've always loved.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably got like my favorite, not just on Farcaster. Like I found him on Twitter first, and like the aesthetic of the stuff that like usually like sort of product type stuff that he is sharing are always like I can't really off the top of my head name an account that I more enjoy just like the aesthetic of the stuff that they tweet and cast. And so not a huge surprise that he sort of started that, and then various people having remixed it since. And yeah, I forget what what led me to that in the first place. But I think to your point, it's just sort of like the latest iteration where you absolutely need to like sort of see that process of, I know what I was saying. Like there's people through this particular, example that I've seen like sort of come out of the woodwork, create one of these images. They've got like a higher PFP of some kind, whether it's, these animals or something prior, or they have like an arrow in their name or something. And like, it's someone that I wasn't previously familiar with. And I'm like sort of continuously surprised because you get the sense on Farcaster that it's like sort of, or at least I do, that it's like smaller than I think. Because so many of the people I sort of see doing stuff are familiar, but then every once in a while you sort of go into a particular niche and find that there is in fact like, a deeper pool of people there that are not just sort of what I presume to be the long tail of Farcaster users, which is like either bots or spammy users or something like that, but actually that there is like at least a piece of the long tail is quality people like doing interesting things and, with thoughtful casts. And I actually, one of the most interesting sort of pools of interesting people that I found on Farcaster has been like really underrated developers through Bountycaster. Like that's just sort of one example where you might sort of, I'll put a bounty up, someone will respond, and next thing you know, like I'm sort of building something with someone that they might have like 36 followers or something, and they might have like, no casts. And so just stumbling upon their profile, you would think that they're like a bot, and it turns out they're actually like a quality builder who just hasn't really built an audience yet and like hasn't really been posting content. So I do think there is like a relatively large group of like sort of untapped talent on Farcaster, whether it's, creatives, writers, artists, coders, whatever else it might be. And so it's both going to be probably a process of, leveling them up through the network and the growth of it, but and then also bringing people over from, whatever crypto Twitter or like the next tangential audience to the types of people who are on there now, which I think we both basically agree are hopefully going to be a little bit more like sort of consumer oriented. And I think we've sort of like captured a good deal of the builders, at least builders and within the base ecosystem and, Ethereum more broadly.
Yeah, that's true. It is definitely like noticeably base heavy, which I don't necessarily object to because it's definitely much more convenient to mostly transact on one layer two. Yeah, to your point about the like underrated builders, this is something I've noticed when people tag their co-founders. It's like there will be one person, like one of the collaborators who's kind of like the spokesman of the project. And then often there's somebody else who they're working with who kind of stays behind the scenes, and they will like occasionally get a shout out. The more talkative person will be like, and of course also, this is all possible because of so and so who, does so much, to like run the code base, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'll go look at that person. And like you said, they'll have like 36 followers and like 3 casts ever. Like I had no idea about you, but there you were, cooking away.
I think there is just a difference basically between like, obviously you've been doing this longer than I have in terms of being like pretty internet first with both social and professional. I was like, obviously like I've been doing things on the internet since I was young, but I like sort of define like, I kind of say like I started doing things on the internet really like only about 5 years ago, because before that I was like, I was on Facebook with people from my real life or whatever, and then not my real life, but my, school and whatever, family, friends, whatever. And then, so it's like you're sort of mirroring your physical social network into the digital world. It was basically the same thing for, like Instagram and Snapchat. I was sort of aware of Twitter, but I wasn't like really involved. I mean, obviously I was aware of it, but and I think, I mean, like I was sort of on it, but like not really. I wasn't tweeting, that's for sure. And then like around 2019, I feel like I went like internet first. And I think when you see these people who are, like you mentioned, like they're the builder who gets the shout out, you would sort of assume like these people are, developers, like building apps. Like you sort of assume, at least I do, that they should be like internet first types of people. But I think there is just like sort of still, we talked about how I get the sense that like Farcast are still small. I think even just people who are sort of like producing on the internet, whether, the simplest version of production is just like a tweet or a cast. Mm-hmm. People who are doing that is like so small versus the people who are strictly consuming. And so when you find these builders who like have 3 casts ever, like I think they're just, they love building, but they're just not people who are accustomed to like sharing things like tweets or writing or anything really. They basically read the internet and build things. And it's kind of surprising to me when I come across those people, because it's like participating in the internet seems so obvious at this point. But I'm sure it's, you've been doing it even longer than me, so it's just like you start to take it for granted. At least I do.
Well, it's sort of mind-boggling to me, but there are actually a lot of people who don't really like attention, or don't want to be the center of attention. Whereas my personality has always been like very, look at me. I want attention to me. I'm talking. And I am like, I don't know. That's just my temperament. But there are a lot of people who are not like that and who don't really want to participate in that way, which is, it's valid too. There's the 99%, 1% rule of thumb, which is that 1% of people actually like create original things. 9% of people comment on those things, or like, in some way visibly.
Reply guys.
Yes, reply guys. They make the world go round. And then 90% of people, the vast majority, like just lurk. That's like internet communities in general work like that. And it's an interesting dynamic where the minority, the vocal minority, is so much more visible just, by the nature of the thing versus the lurking majority. And I don't know, it's an interesting and weird dynamic. But I really appreciate the lurkers. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, no, thank you, lurkers, for being an audience here. I think your point is definitely valid. I don't know, what the exact percentages are, but I remember like I did the math like on sort of Twitter's ratios for like sort of the categories that you just described. It's like a couple of years ago I did this, so I don't really remember the balance even enough to approximate it. It was like roughly aligned with the concept of what you're saying, like directionally in that percentages. And the takeaway for me was like, it's easy, especially when you're even like you said, like all these people, even if you're producing or a reply guy 1% or 9% or whatever, you're still also consuming. And so everyone's sort of in that bucket, and everyone who is in that bucket, which is a lot of people who are consuming these social networks, it's hard to not sort of implicitly start to feel like what is being said on there, like the way people are acting on there, the views that are being expressed, all of these things are like the toxicity of it, of fighting on Twitter and whatnot, like all of these things, it's tempting to feel are representative of the world at large. And I think the important thing for me to realize is like Twitter is actually like a horrible representation of what people in the world are like, because it's just such a small fraction of people that are actually writing. And it's like way overweighted towards like, celebrities or influencers, like very specific sort of, orientation that it's like way overrepresented in this relatively tiny population that is just not a good representation of people. And so like to me that was like a positive thing, because I often feel like Twitter in particular, I mean especially now, you mentioned sort of becoming a little bit less into it alongside becoming more into Farcaster. For me, like the big thing that I don't like about it, it's not like I don't really care about, generally speaking, I think I probably prefer like Elon being in charge now, and in terms of like content moderation or whatever. But the bigger deal to me is like the platform. He's not just changed. I think it's a lot of people sort of talk about how he's changed the content moderation and whatnot and all that. But the bigger issue for me is like it used to be a place where I could go and read interesting ideas from people, and it was, by default, like very text based. And now it's I go through my feed and like I'll just do like sort of a random sampling once in a while, and like the top 15, 20 posts, like let's say the top 20 posts, like 12 of them are videos, like 4 of them are photos, and then like 2 of them are like quote tweets, probably like a photo or a video, and then like, you know, 2 of them are just text only, like plain tweets, which used to be like almost everything. And
Mm,
that's what I think Farcaster, like, there's definitely videos and photos, but I think Farcaster remains much more so a text first platform with a Twitter style feed. And that's just like really what I enjoy. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if, like, I still am on Twitter a good amount. It's just hard to compete with, as someone, if you're trying to, build products or audience or whatever it might be. It is, I think, still like sort of the main show. Um,
those
but
network effects.
yeah, but I'm hopeful that Farcaster, I'm certainly like, even this, this podcast called Purple People, it's me leaning into Farcaster because, I've seen, we've seen a few sort of shots on goal at building crypto first social networks, and they tend to go super viral very quickly and then die soon after because they're pretty financial. And Farcaster has sort of like dodged that fate and persisted and grown slowly and deliberately over about like 3 years now. And sort of like the Lindy effect, like, however long it survived, you can expect it to continue to survive. And it's getting to a point where I feel like, if you took Farcaster away overnight, like a lot of people would be very, very upset.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case for like a lot of things in crypto. So, and most of all, it's just like, I think we both agree it's just a fun place to hang out. And I didn't really have, you explained like how for years you were sort of meeting people on the internet and getting to meet up with them in San Francisco. I haven't done as much of that myself from Twitter or anywhere else. And Farcaster, I feel like, is the first place where I've met people and become friendly with them over the internet first for, for a relatively long duration of time, months or a couple of years or whatever. And then you sort of get to manifest that relationship in person when you meet them at, if you're in the same town as them or whatever. It's like relatively few instances of this for me, but I'm excited for FarCon in New York. I'm hopefully going to go to that and meet some people in real life. And it's very cool to, like, the internet is just such a better place to meet like-minded people than, a random place in the physical world where the chances that you have like so much common interest is just going to be very small. If you meet people in the internet, it can just be such a better match. And then you sort of print that relationship out into the physical world. And I think it's just like a very interesting way of building. Like, social network is often, associated with like the, like digital and Facebook and whatnot. But if you just take like the literal concept of a social network being, both physical and digital, just everyone, I think the concept of building that internet first, as you have, and like as I'm now doing more so in recent years, is just like a very compelling way to be. And I think, I'm sort of awaiting more organized ways of like, how do all of the people who have built relationships in these ways find ways to spend more time together, in person in the physical world. I think that's sort of like an interesting problem to attack.
It is. That's a tough problem. So, like, for the people who live in big cities or near enough to big cities, it is so much easier than people who live in just, like the random long tail of places that people live.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. Unless you get people to move, I don't know how you solve for that aspect. But your
Yeah.
point about you can filter people for vibe or like for like, sort of a simpatico ethos so much more easily online. Like, I have a toddler and I've been wanting to meet other parents who have kids of a similar age so that they can play together and so the adults can hang out at the same time. And I have some who I've met, just like randomly in various ways in my area, but it's so hard to find someone you actually click with in like a deeper way. Like there are plenty of these people who I get along with fine, but it's just not the same as my internet friends, you know, like there's so much less of a shared frame of reference or like shared values, either of those. And it just, some of these IRL first friendships just kind of pale in comparison to the quality of my URL first friendships that then went into the IRL world.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. Like, I don't know if you've, for me, like, you know, for me, it seems like you were like way ahead of the time in doing this. Even if it's just a matter of 5 or 10 years or something, that's like significantly ahead. And I feel like I'm just getting there, and I still feel like I'm far ahead of a lot of other people, especially my, you know, what you call like IRL first friends who just, you know, they're just consumers of the internet for the most part. Or, you know, maybe they're on Instagram or whatever for, with people again, who are sort of mapped from their physical world social networks. But like, I feel like the internet first social thing is still relatively new, and it's sort of what you've known for a while now. So it's just interesting to hear your perspective. I don't know if you've appreciated that that's like, that you've been sort of like ahead on that, because it sounds like, you know, a lot of your friends are also in the same boat. And plus you're in San Francisco, which is probably the most popular place in the world to have sort of been ahead in that regard. But yeah, it's
I
just
think
interesting to hear.
my sample is definitely very skewed because like most of the people who I interact with the most or like talk to the most have also been into this way of making friends, you know, for years at least. And so it feels normal to me, but I don't interact in like a substantive way with as many like actually normal people, or like quote unquote normal, who even is really normal. I mean, I
Right.
don't know. I chat with some of the other regulars at the coffee shop sometimes, or like my sister is not a very like super online person. Neither are my parents really, at least not in this respect. But most of my like the people I would consider my peers, I guess, are of this nature. And like I would put you in that group for sure. In terms of like, you know, having this podcast, say that's a very like I make friends online kind of thing to do.
Right.
In my opinion.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm definitely not in the normal people bucket, for sure. And you know, I agree with you also that the people who are in the normal people bucket, you know, who is normal. But I just think sometimes people, you know, like you and I, underappreciate how unusual it is, the way that we are sort of like operating, and in
Yeah,
this,
no, I
you
think
know,
you're totally
context
right.
socially.
I do wonder, oh, this is where I was going and I sort of forgot that I was trying to get to this point, which was I wonder um, the people who we're calling normal, for lack of a better word, I guess the more average, I don't know, whatever. Those people,
Or
I do
more common.
yeah, do they feel the same kind of yearning and dissatisfaction with, you know, the people who they've like randomly been thrown in with that we do? Or is it that, you know, like feeling that I need to find my people and my people are hard to find in person? Is that feeling what drives you to the internet? So I think there was an aspect of that for me where I'm both like inherently interested in kind of the nature of community and how that is expressed through like internet gatherings of people. But then also like part of what made me so obsessed was just like my people were online, you know, people who like to write, people who have an easier time writing than talking. Like, definitely, that's me. People who are interested in ideas, people who are curious about, you know, the vast wealth of information about the world. And like Infowars, that group of people is disproportionately online. And that drew me to be online. And there's like a sort of self reinforcing cycle there. And I don't know if normies feel the same way. Like, do they feel the same longing and the same like difficulty finding a group that they vibe with? I don't really know. I mean, I guess the answer
Yeah.
is sometimes yes, sometimes no. But I wonder if it's sort of like a different average in terms of who feels that way.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, there's something to the idea that like you don't really miss what you don't know. And so, someone who I've always used, like, I think just like sort of an easy example is like someone in, rural Alabama who's like super into this like specific video game or something, like, and no one else they know like in their town is into it at all. Like, they're probably naturally going to gravitate towards the internet because like they're already into gaming, and then like find people who are into this game and like spend a lot of time in the digital world because like those are going to be people who are just like interested in what they're interested in. They just have like almost no one around them who is also interested in that thing. So they sort of find that because they want that. But if you're from, I don't know, California, and you like surfing, this is not an example I use often. I'm just trying to come up with an opposite example here. So if you're from like, or maybe like you're from Colorado and you love skiing, like you might not really need or feel that pull to the internet because like there's people who love to ski all around you. And so like you have a better in-person sort of surroundings to like-minded people. Even if it's not in all things, like at least that like sort of top level filter is aligned. And so I think some people, like, depending on their interests, maybe sort of have a predisposition to end up being kind of internet first. And so maybe the people who sort of like most want that, like sort of better matching, sort of get there by necessity in a way. And people who don't get there, maybe it's because they're just generally sort of like more satisfied locally or something like that. I have no idea, but that's sort of like one perspective on it.
I like what you touched on there, which is that it's a combination of your interests and the context that you find yourself in. Like, say you're in rural Alabama and you get really obsessed with the idea of surfing, right? Like, even though surfing is an IRL thing, you wouldn't, in your Alabama. Now I'm questioning my geographic.
There's no surfing.
There's definitely no surfing in Alabama. So if you're like, you might be getting into YouTube and like Discord because that's where you can share that interest given your local context. Although I guess you could then go one layer further and say that, well, surfing is a physical activity and it's a way to explore the world around you using your meat body. And that if the person who is sort of hypothetically obsessed with surfing were actually the kind of person who wants to go outside and use their meat body, then they would not be going down this like digital communities equivalent rabbit hole, because that is not what it's like to actually be the kind of person who does surfing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I exactly know what you mean. And it's there's too many counters to the counters to figure out a resolution. And I know we've gone way over time, so I will wrap it up. I appreciate the time that you have taken and shared with me, and hope people enjoy the conversation and everything like that. But yeah, it's regardless, I think a sort of point worth making is that we met on Farcaster. I met a lot of great people on Farcaster I've been able to have on this podcast, and looking forward to meeting them, a lot of them in real life, and just sort of continuing to feed that URL to IRL funnel, because it has led to meeting a lot of awesome people, and just feels like a better way to do it for me personally. Maybe you and I are, outliers, and that sort of works better for us. But
everybody,
so far it's been interesting.
Everyone listening to this podcast is also likely to be that type of outlier. I was thinking that we could ask, like, hey, any normal people listening to this podcast, can you weigh in on what your life is like? And then I was, wait, there are normal people listening to this podcast.
Not on a Farcaster first podcast, which I'm almost exclusively sharing on Farcaster, and like people can listen to in a frame. Not going to be a lot of normal people in that context by the way that we're defining it. So it would be a tough audience to be representative. But anyway, thanks again for taking the time. Really enjoyed the conversation, and we'll see you in the feed, and look forward to talking some more.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and hopefully we'll meet in person someday.
Yep. Are any consideration around FarCon this year?
I would love to go to FarCon, but the aforementioned toddler makes it kind of difficult to travel. So I'm just going to feel intense FOMO seeing everybody's group selfies.
That's fair. I did that last year, so I'm sure there'll be more people with you on that than actually in New York. But at some point would be great to connect IRL as well.
Well, I hope you have a blast.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and talk soon.
Thanks. All right. Bye.